What's going on, College Hoops heads? This is another live stream on both the Center Hub's YouTube channel and our Twitter page. This is, I believe, live stream number 3. You heard us last week talk WCC, we talked ACC, we talked MEAC, and we talked OVC. Today, we are joined by Kevin Lucas. Kevin is covering the Mountain West, and Kevin is covering the Big South. No conferences with V's in them, unlike last week. Nonetheless, my name is Stephen Bagel. I am hosting today with Conrad Pascal. You know him. You love him. The man, the myth, the legend, Conrad Pascal. And yeah, as I said, we are joined by Kevin. Kevin is one of the contributors that are outside of the Center Hub, but he's part of the family. And he's, helping write the magazine. So if you guys have listened to the One and Done podcast, you're very familiar. Kevin's been a multi-time guest. If you haven't, go listen to the One and Done podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Glad to be here. College basketball season is right around the corner, I feel like. As Tug mentioned on the last episode, I swear, when college football hits, college basketball is essentially right there for us. And I think we're, less than 7 weeks out. And this offseason went by super fast, but I'm glad to be back, man. It should be an amazing season. And I appreciate you guys for having me on and for giving me the opportunity. And so I'm grateful to get into it, man, talk about the Big South and the Mountain West.
So you're saying it's gone super fast. We are releasing the magazine, I think, in 4 weeks from yesterday.
Yeah.
Let's hope that, obviously, I want that 4 weeks to fly by, of course, because I want college basketball season to be here. But at the same time, we have to produce this whole magazine. We're in good shape, but let's slow down a little bit. Conrad, how you doing before we get started?
Excellent. As you just said, everything's ramping up. These aren't just going to be predictions and speculation anymore. The training camps are about to break open. And we're getting a lot more clarity with the teams and the conferences that we're about to discuss.
Okay, so as we said, we are talking Mountain West and Big South. Let's start with the Mountain West first. I suppose my first question for Kevin is, we've seen the Mountain West become, probably the highest of mid-majors, I would say. They 2 years ago got the same amount of bids as the ACC. They each got 5, and that was only because that year NC State went on that run as the 10 seed in the ACC tournaments to get the auto bid. Otherwise, the Mountain West would have had 5, and the ACC would have had 4. But with that said, what did the Mountain West have last year? 4 teams? Oh, they had 6 teams make it 2 years ago, didn't they?
I believe so, yes.
They had 6, so they did have more than the ACC. They had 6 teams make it 2 years ago. Last year, they had 4. So they're up there with teams like the ACC and conferences like the ACC and the Big East in terms of getting teams in the tournaments. The issue is, yes, we saw San Diego State make that championship run with their win over FAU to them to use UConn in the national championship. But aside from that, they just have not had much. I think outside of that, there's been the last 2 years after that, Utah State won a game, San Diego State won a game. I think that might be it. They have not had, given they've had 10 teams in the tournament the last 2 years, they have struggled, to say the least. I think New Mexico might have beat Marquette last year, but Either way, my question is, that was my long-winded way of asking, how many teams, before we really get into the nitty-gritty of this conference, do we think are going to make the NCAA tournament out of the Mountain West?
I want to say it's probably going to end up being 4 again, to be honest with you. I just think because it's so much newcomers, right? So much transition. You lose Coach Medved at Colorado State, which I think is a devastating loss for the conference. But San Diego State is reloaded. Utah State is going to be right back in the fold with Coach Calhoun. And then New Mexico, I want to throw in there. You got to give Coach Olin some time, of course, trying to slide in there and replace Richard Pitino. So I'm going to put them in there. And then I'm going to throw Grand Canyon in there too, man, with Coach Drew. I know it's their first year in the conference, and I think they have a lot there. I know it's tough losing Tyon Grant Foster, who was there for what felt like a billion years. But the Lopes have consistently been one of the better programs on the West Coast, and I expect that train to just keep on rolling. And so I expect about 4 teams to get back into the NCAA tournament this year and actually win some games, to be honest with you.
It's interesting that you didn't mention Boise State.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one, too. I do like them a lot, too. Yeah, I'll actually throw them in there. My bad. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, but bottom line is 4 of those 5. Maybe you throw Nevada's always good. We know you talk to Coach Alford. So, 4 or 6 teams find a way.
Yeah, I say anywhere between like 4 and 6. I just think, especially being like it's the last real year of the conference, kind of being the throwback Mountain West. I think all those teams have a great shot, and I think most of them are hungry too, right, to prove a point that this conference is legit. This conference has teams that can win at a high level. Again, you mentioned San Diego State going to the Final Four national championship game a few years ago. So when you look at the conference overall from top to bottom, it's a whole bunch of good coaches. It's a lot of quality transfers. It's a lot of players that have developed at their school for multiple years. So I think all in all, I think 5, 6 schools is probably about right, but I think maybe it'll end up between maybe like 4 and 5.
Okay, so Conrad, do you have any follow-ups to that, or should we just get into? I suppose San Diego State is really the first talking point.
Actually, yeah. I mean, I think the questions I have, or maybe the talking points I have, are also kind of related to like team specific. So I think we can just go down. We can go down the conference,
Okay, so then my first question, Kevin, is this conference San Diego State's to lose? We talked about, being a multi-bid league, but that's my main question. Like, to me, I'm a big proponent of Utah State this year. I think just their culture, and obviously I'm a little biased because I have a relationship with Coach Calhoun, but even without that, like, they've been so good every single year, no matter who the coach is. All the coaches have gone on to greener pastures because of how good of the coaching hire it was. So with that said, I love Utah State. I think they're awesome. But San Diego State still seems, I wouldn't say head and shoulders, but San Diego State still seems to be, with Magoon Guath, with Miles Bird, Reese Waters is back this year. He was out for the year last year. Like, is San Diego State still mostly the clear front runner in this conference?
I think they are, man. And they remind me so much of that team that went to the Final Four a few years ago that had, Darion Trammell, Lamont Butler, Matt Bradley, Nate Mensah, and those guys, because they're just old and experienced, right? And you mentioned, I mean, you bring back 2 guys that could easily compete for Mountain West Player of the Year, Magoon Guath and Miles Bird, right? And then you mentioned Reese Dixon Waters has been a player, missed all last year with a foot injury. Miles Bird is back. Miles Bird. And then they just have a lot. Farrell Compton, I think, is going to take a huge, huge leap as a sophomore. I feel like they've been raving about him a lot. And Miles Heidi's another guy, right, that enters the fold, that just knows how to do his job, does his role at a high level. And I think when you just have that mix of chemistry, camaraderie, experience, and coaching, it's just tough to beat that. And especially last year, they're hungry, right? I think last year they didn't really live up to the standard of what Coach Dutcher and Coach Steve Fisher before him have set down there at the Mesa. So I think San Diego State is definitely the favorite, but I do agree with you. Utah State is going to be right there in the mix. They have a lot of interesting pieces too, but overall, the Aztecs, man, they just have it. And I think when you look at that roster from top to bottom, you got the guard play, you got the defensive versatility, the rebounding. I think that's kind of been the main thing that's held San Diego State back the last few years, is just offensive firepower, because we know they're going to guard at a high level, they're going to rebound, but now they have real deal bucket getters, and they have guys that can score off the dribble and beat their matchups one-on-one. So overall, I just think the Aztecs just have it all, to be honest with you guys. So I expect them to make a lot of noise this year and be honestly ranked in the top 15 for majority of the season.
So I actually did, and Conrad, I'll pick your brain in a second as well. I'm actively working for the magazine. By the way, go purchase that. If you're listening on YouTube, the link is in the bio. If you're listening on Twitter, the link to purchase is pinned in our pin tweet. But for the magazine, I'm drafting my top 25, my top 25 teams in the country preseason. San Diego State is right there. I think right now I have 25 spots for 28 teams that I'm still trying to decipher between. San Diego State is firmly within that mix in terms of, being a top 25 team, even in the preseason. So I agree with Kevin's sentiment that yes, they might be a top 15 team all year. Conrad, as an outsider, obviously Kevin is a little bit more plugged in with this conference than we are, given he's writing the conference for the magazine. But what's your overall sentiment of, I suppose, San Diego State and maybe the Mountain West hierarchy?
Well, San Diego State, I mean, personally, I used to live in San Diego, so I'm definitely familiar with their program,
Mm-hmm.
But I would largely agree that, yeah, I think given it's not necessarily just the number of players that they returned from last year, but who they are, right? Like the key players, as you said, Miles Bird, Magoon Guath. It's really interesting, though, because you look at where they were last year, you look at them now, but I mean, like, it's not necessarily, it's never really a direct comparison from season to season anymore. You know, as you said at the top of the episode, with just like the nature of, you know, the transfer portal and everything, like you rarely see a roster completely intact. So I'm actually kind of interested to see like how much of if there is a gap between them and the rest of the conference, how much they still lead the conference, given that there are other teams who have kind of brought back a majority of their rotation from last year. You know, several of the teams that Kevin listed, you know, like even like, I don't know where you would rank, like, say, like a Boise State, but like, how much do you actually think then that San Diego State's like chemistry and familiarity kind of still gives them a leg up in the conference?
Man, I think it's interesting because I feel like Utah State doesn't return as many guys, but I think Utah State's core is just as good, almost. Maybe not as deep again, but overall, I think, again, man, you bring back multiple starters, you bring back multiple dudes that were there last season. And I think, me personally, I'm a big advocate of experience. I think when you look at the Final Four last year, outside of Duke, who we all know is an anomaly, but I mean, even, you know, Houston, Florida, Auburn, they had a lot of transfers, but they had a lot of transfers that were there for multiple seasons. I think that's important. And especially for San Diego State, like, yeah, I mean, again, Heidi, BJ Davis, you know, Miles Burr, Magoon Guath, it's just up and down this roster, there's a whole bunch of guys that already know the system. So I think that gives them a huge edge, to be honest with you guys.
For what it's worth, Magoon Guath was visiting Kentucky at one point in the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he decided to come back to San Diego State, but like, if Kentucky and Mark Pope were interested in you, they ended up getting Jaden Quaidon. So just for perspective of how good Magoon Guath might be. I put up pod one. It says pod one of San Diego State's schedule. Aside from the bottom three games, San Jose State, Boise State, Nevada, those are conference games. Very incredibly difficult, I would say, this non-con. They're playing the Players Era Festival. You see Michigan, Oregon, and then depending how those two games go, they have a third game in 3 days in Vegas, or three and three, or 3 and 4, depending how the scheduling works out. That Arizona game it's a neutral, but it's in Phoenix, Arizona, so it's an away game. Let's call it what it is. Those are going to be 4 really tough games before you even get into, you know, conference play, which in the Mountain West, like, it's going to be a bloodbath. That's why so many teams have gotten into the tournament. The Mountain West didn't get so many teams in the tournament the last 2 years because of all the non-conference schedules. Some of it was due to that, but it was also due to how good the quality wins are beating each other up, if that makes sense. But if San Diego State wants to add a large bit, I'd say they have to. I mean, they're going to win the Mountain West anyway, so that should be enough quality wins to get them in. But on this non-con, I mean, Michigan, Oregon, one more game in Players Era, Arizona. How many of those games do we realistically think they could win?
I like them in that Oregon matchup. Mm-hmm. Arizona's going to be tough this year. I think they can beat them. I wouldn't punch it in as a guaranteed win, though.
Yeah, and it depends who they play in that last game of the Players Era as well.
Yeah, and Michigan's a winnable game, too. I mean, Michigan is obviously getting a lot of praises off season for, you know, a lot of the moves that they made, but I think that'll be an interesting game. I mean, of course, you know, that's where Dutcher was at previously as an assistant coach before he transitioned over to San Diego State, so they're definitely going to play hard for him, but I think they can squeeze out a few of those, to be honest with you. I mean, if you pick up one of the games, you know, again, I feel very comfortable that they beat Oregon, even though Oregon's not going to be a breeze-by game either. But you win 2 of those 3 games, I think you're in a good spot, to be honest with you. I think that's probably what they're aiming for and probably what they should shoot for.
So, okay, I think let's pivot a little bit from San Diego State. Kevin, you mentioned, and Conrad, you could follow up with anything, but I want to talk about Grand Canyon specifically because this is the first year in the Mountain West. Kevin alluded to them as a potential tournament team. Obviously very different from being in the WAC. Obviously WAC's a 1 bid league, and Mountain West, you have multiple bites at the apple in terms of getting in. But what Bryce Drew has done with this program is like phenomenal. Like, they jumped from the WAC, they were supposed to go to WCC. They just ended up going straight to the Mountain West. Dusty Stromer from Gonzaga, Brian Moore from Norfolk State. They had Mekhi Williams returning, Jaden Henley from UNLV, and Nanu Uwusuwane, who was at Brown, who redshirted last year. Like, they have some guys. Like, that's a good starting five. Again, very disciplined program with Bryce Drew. Like, Kevin, what's your overall just sentiment of Grand Canyon in the Mountain West?
Yeah, man, I think this conference fits them perfectly. And nothing against the WAC, because the WAC is a very good conference, but I don't feel like they were getting challenged on a nightly basis just because of the resources, the talent, everything that Coach Drew has brought down there. But in the Mountain West, it just seems like a seamless fit. And you mentioned some of those guys. I still firmly believe in Dusty Stromer. I know he couldn't really get his game off playing at Gonzaga. I know it's probably just a weird fit, and there was a lot going on there. But, Dennis Evans, even Wilhelm Breidenbach, right? He bounced around a couple different places. He was at Nebraska a few years ago playing for Fred Hoiberg in the Big Ten. So I just think they have a lot of defensive versatility. I think they have multiple floor spacers, and they have guards that can break you down off the dribble too, that can get to their spot. So overall, they're always going to be in the mix, I think. And Bryce Drew has done an amazing job just cultivating that program, getting guys out there, producing, getting guys up to higher levels in college basketball. We all know the Tyon Grant Foster story. So overall, I think they're going to be in the mix year one. And it's going to be tough just because, again, this conference is really no off nights outside of maybe like one or two teams. But Bryce Drew knows what he's doing. That staff knows what they're doing. And they just know how to win at a high level. And so I think expecting them back in the NCAA tournament should be, what they are aiming for. And overall, I mean, the Lopes men just year in and year out have been a consistent threat on the West Coast, to be honest with you guys. So I'm looking forward to seeing, how Grand Canyon makes his transition from the WAC to the Mountain West.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Grand Canyon, they come to the Mountain West with like a number of incoming transfers, but these aren't like transfer students that transferred because they weren't getting minutes at their previous schools. I mean, these are like high minute guys. Mm-hmm. What do you think about Caleb Smith and Wilhelm Breidenbach? Coming in, they're both approximately like around 6'10", but they can shoot. I mean, they can step out and knock down some shots. I mean, I always really find it interesting, like how, like, sometimes like I wonder, like, are coaches just trying to assemble the best collection of talent possible, or are you actually like trying to assemble a team that can counter, like your division or your conference rivals? Because you could see how this Grand Canyon front court could give, say, like San Diego State some fits, right?
Yeah, and coincidentally, they're both Southern California kids, right? So I think, I actually seen both of them play in high school. Wilhelm was at Mater Dei. Caleb was at Damien High School, which is out there in the Inland Empire. So I think when you have two bigs that can stretch the floor like that, you can never have enough floor spacing. Right? I think that's the name of the game. But you make life easier for your guards, right? You unclog the paint. And both of them can really slide their feet on the defensive end of the floor too. So I think when you look at that offensive versatility and defensive versatility on both ends of the floor between those two guys in your front court is not enough to be said about that. I think Coach Drew did that intentionally, knowing that, hey, we're going to need to be able to shoot because we're going to run into teams like San Diego State, and the best way to beat San Diego State is you got to hit shots, point blank, period. That defense is not going to let you off the hook with anything. And so when you look at Grand Canyon, I mean, those two guys in particular should help this team win a lot of games, right? Just because, again, they block shots, they rebound, you could play through them, and they played in a ton of games, right? Caleb at UC Riverside, and again, Wilhelm has been around the block, whether it was Nebraska or a few different schools. So overall, I think those two are going to be key components of what Grand Canyon does this year.
Yeah. That's why, I mean, like, I don't know, from the outside looking in, I'm like, should we be calling them a sleeper? I mean, like, I don't know. No. They're built. They seem to be built, for specific matchups, because, hey, right, that's one way to ensure you could punch your ticket to the big dance.
And Brian Moore is an interesting one too. Shout out to Matt for throwing that one out there. He is very, very good. So I just think, Coach Drew has done an amazing job with that program. And he just knows how to not just identify talent, but identify talent that fits his system. And I think that's important because it's a lot of transfers that go to these places that are held in high regard, and they just don't pan out just because they don't really fit the scheme and what these coaches and programs are trying to execute. But I think Coach Drew just knows how to identify the guys that fit into his program to a T, and he lets them have a whole lot of freedom to do what they do and get their game off. So, Brian Moore is going to be a player too for them this year.
Nice.
What about, let's talk about Utah State. Like, what do they stack up? In my opinion, they're the second best team behind San Diego State. Do you agree with that statement, or is it, I suppose, less open and shut than that?
They're right there.
Yeah.
To me, I've been going back and forth with it for weeks on end now, just because I think we can all agree Mason Falslev is ready to take that next leap, right? He kind of just waited his turn with Ian Martinez last year. Ian Martinez was a dog, right? He can go off for 20 plus points on any given night. But Mason Falslev gets the job done. He is a high level bucket getter. He knows how to play through the offense. He's not out there forcing shots. He's a great leader. You know, Coach Calhoun raves a lot about him. And so I'm very ecstatic to see what he does this upcoming year. And you look at some of their other returners. I mean, Tucker Anderson, another guy that just plays hard, rebounds, runs the floor hard, defends at a high level. Jordy Barnes, you know, they just I feel like no matter who's the coach there, they just figure it out, right? And you've seen the last few years they've had coaches go on to the next level and have success and do their thing. But Coach Calhoun, I mean, what can you say, man? Getting them to the NCAA tournament year one, I think they're hungry to get back. I know they were not, you know, ecstatic by how they lost in the tournament last year to UCLA, so I know they want to get back and actually go on a run and make some national noise for Utah State. But overall, they have as many pieces as you possibly can to compete and win at a high level. Like, this is a team I could easily see in the Sweet 16 with no doubt in my mind, honestly, just because of the guard play, you know, the wings that can guard, shoot at a high level. You have multiple guys, and everybody just knows their role. I think that's the best thing about Coach Calhoun's team is everybody just knows their role. They play a selfless brand of basketball, and they all have complete buy-in. So, yeah, when I look at Utah State, I look at them in the same regard as San Diego State. I just think I lean San Diego State a little bit more because they just have simply a few more returners. But overall, I think that core of what Utah State is bringing back, plus those transfers, is important. And they have some freshmen, too, that are very, very good. So, yeah, I think Utah State is right there in the mix.
Is there a team that, you know, that people aren't necessarily talking about right now as a surprise team that you think, you know, people should be talking about? Like, what team is going to surprise us in this conference this year?
Man, off the top of my head, I mean, it's a few. I'd probably go with New Mexico. I think that's probably the easy answer. New Mexico always has all the resources. They have the coaching, right? You know, you get Coach Olin from UC San Diego, who just took them to the tournament for the first time in their history. But I'm never really too harsh on coaches in first year situation, just because you never know, right? You're already kind of, you know, behind the eight ball when you get hired to your new program. You're just trying to throw around a roster, trying to put a coaching staff together. So it's tough. And especially because, you know, you just lost what I would call a program great in Donovan Dent, and you just had a good year where you went to the second round of the NCAA tournament. But Coach Olin knows how to win, right? He plays a brand of basketball that's fun. You know, he plays a brand of basketball that is very guard friendly, and guys buy in and guys know exactly what they need to do. And overall, New Mexico, I just feel like it's one of those programs that's always in the mix, that's always winning at a high level. And it's tough, but walking in year one, I just think with all the different coaching transitions, especially at, you know, Colorado State, Fresno State, you know, San Jose State is still trying to get off the ground, you know, with Tim Miles. Air Force is tough just because of the requirements it takes to get into an academy school. But overall, I think New Mexico is going to be right there. It'll be tough again, you know, being that it's year one, but New Mexico has a lot of pieces that are intriguing in my opinion.
Nice. Do you actually think, going back, actually, I mean, it applies both to New Mexico and Utah State, just kind of thinking, I mean, as a UCSD alum, like, yeah, I'm familiar with Eric Olin's, you know, style of offense. And right now, given the way New Mexico's roster is currently built, I could definitely see him running a similar style, right, with his current personnel. But for Utah State, given that, like, you know, you held them in as high regard, like, you know, maybe like somewhere towards the echelon of San Diego State, do you actually think that Utah State has the necessary size to match up well with them, especially given that like they have guys that can get out and run, but I mean, in half court sets, I'm wondering, like, what do you envision from that front court group?
I mean, yeah, it's going to be tough just because I don't think they do have the size. But the thing about them that I personally love watching about them and personally appreciate is the zone defense that coach runs. I call it like an exotic zone. And we talked about it a little bit when we talked. I was one of the first coaches I talked to. And he just said, you know, we implement a lot of man principles into our zone schemes, but it really makes offenses uncomfortable, right? It forces you to take shots that you're not, you know, in spots that you're not accustomed to taking from, right? It forces you to make quick decisions, and you never really get into a rhythm. And I think that, when you look in the NCAA tournament, I mean, we've seen Syracuse a billion times, right? Just disrupt teams with that zone. And obviously Syracuse had a lot of length. They had a lot of athleticism, so it's a little bit different. But I think overall it's the same kind of meats and potatoes of the zone, that they just force you into a lot of difficult situations. In late shot clock situations, you always feel like you're sped up. And it's only a few teams that really know how to execute at a high level. I feel like we watched so many different teams that just struggle playing against zones. And Utah State just runs one. Like, I remember the Iowa game last year. I can't remember exactly where the game was played at, but it was a non-conference game, of course, and they were on a neutral floor, and Iowa just did not know where to go. Like, in the first half, they were hitting shots, which Iowa does, but in that second half, they were just completely shot. Like from a mental standpoint, they didn't know who to go to. They didn't know where to get their shots from. So I think that gives them an advantage, and I think that's kind of purposely what Coach Calhoun wants to do. But ultimately, I do agree with you. I think size might end up hurting them in the long run, but overall, I mean, I think they got a lot of pieces there to kind of make up for that.
So then I put a question on the screen again from Matt. Thoughts on Pastner and Ali Faruq. I've been trying. I've really been trying to pronounce his name. Ali Fakumanishev in year one. Obviously, Pastner, friend of the one and done pod at UNLV. I think that UNLV squad is super underrated. Like, I think Pastner has some serious talent on that team, while Colorado State, I agree with what Kevin first said when he came on the pod, is like, Nico Medved is a big loss, not only to Colorado State, but to this conference as a whole. UNLV, obviously, Nas Cunningham was a 4-star that played at Alabama last year, redshirted. Miles Che, who was at UC Irvine. Kamani Hamilton from High Points. They have some high major guys like Emmanuel Stephen and Dre Gibbs Longhorn. And then Colorado State, like, I don't want to say it's more of a rebuilding year because I think they have a good coach and they're historically, good program the last however many years. That I really like the guy from Florida Gulf Coast, Javen Muniz. But Kevin, what's your overall sentiment of, these two coaches? We talked about Olin a little bit as well in terms of new incoming coaches. But, I mean, what do you think of these two guys?
I love the hires for both schools, to be honest with you. I really do. I mean, again, Medved is tough. I'm looking forward to seeing what Medved does in Minnesota for the next few years. But, promoting Ali, Coach Ali, I'm just calling that, at Colorado State, I think is a hell of a hire. And, you bring in Kerry Booth Jr., who's the son of Calvin Booth. They're very familiar with that Colorado area. Of course, he was a former Nuggets GM. But Kerry Booth Jr., I think, is a guy that I loved his game a lot at Notre Dame a few years ago, and he kind of just got lost in the shuffle at Illinois, to be honest. I just don't think he had the defensive prowess. But I think, again, going back closer to home, being in familiar territory, playing in the Mountain West is probably the better level for you. I think they'll be fine. I expect them to struggle a little bit just because I don't think their guard play is necessarily the best. I just think they kind of lacking a little bit in that department. But overall, I mean, they should be in a lot of games this year. They should be in a lot of close games. They should be competitive. And Coach Ali is definitely going to keep that program rolling. I mean, you look at the last few years, David Roddy, Isaiah Stevens, this past year, Nick Clifford. I expect that trend to keep going. Maybe not this year. We'll see. Somebody could pop up and surprise us. Who knows? That's just the nature of the beast. But overall, if you're a Colorado State fan, you guys should be happy and ecstatic because, again, even though you lost a very good coach, you brought in another one that could do a lot of similar things in his own way. So I definitely think they're going to be set up really well for the next few years. And then for UNLV, I mean, you mentioned Dre Gibbs Longhorn. I really love Emmanuel Stephen. I watched him a few years ago play for Paul George Elite, where they had Carter Bryant, Jace Richardson, and a few other guys. And he is a huge body that just protects the paint at a high level. And I think a lot of guards and wings are going to have second thoughts about attacking the paint against this dude. And again, he was at Arizona, couldn't really crack the rotation. Of course, Tommy Lloyd had a lot of good front court players. I think Tommy Lloyd is very good at that, bringing guys, especially overseas, to that program and to Gonzaga before that. But overall, UNLV is a team that I definitely think could jump off the page and win a lot of games, honestly. I think Pastner he knows the landscape and he knows how to win at a high level. And I know Georgia Tech was kind of a tough job, but UNLV, I think it's like a sleeping giant, right? I mean, Coach Kruger brought in a lot of talent to that program. They've had guys that have produced at high level. So I look at it like this is a team I'm not sleep on whatsoever. I think they're going to win some games that they probably shouldn't win this year. And I think they're probably going to beat those teams, that we mentioned at top tier, Utah State and San Diego State, at the crib, multiple times. And I know Josh Pastner, I've seen you talk to him, Steven, on the One and Done podcast. He's a high energy dude, right? He requires you to play with high energy at all times. So I think UNLV is a good job for him. It's an interesting job, though, because you think, being in Vegas, they just have all these resources dumped into the program, but it's not really like that. You kind of got to earn your keep out there. And we all know it's a lot to do in Vegas, but Josh Pastner, I believe firmly, is the right dude for the job.
Okay. Conrad, does that prompt any follow-up from you?
Actually, I mean, earlier you kind of going through like the entire, the landscape of the conference, and talking to head coaches of other conferences, they always say like sometimes, right, the way they characterize or identify or assess the strength of the conference is by the bottom of the conference, like the teams towards the bottom of the standings. There have been a couple teams that have kind of struggled these last couple of years. But I mean, as you said, whether it's Air Force or, Fresno State, even San Jose State, every now and then they'll play spoiler. What have you seen from like those teams? Are they still kind of like, they'll kind of play spoiler for the teams that have high aspirations, or are they kind of moving in, I guess, like, for lack of a better word or term, the right direction?
Yeah, San Jose State, I think, is a team that should win a few games at home this year. And, talking to Coach Miles, of course, he was in the Big Ten, so he's played or coached in high major conferences at Nebraska, and he knows, what it takes. And San Jose State, I swear, is just a weird job, if I'm just being honest with you guys, right? You're up there in the Bay. It's a whole bunch of programs already up there between San Francisco, Santa Clara. You can go down the list, right? And St. Mary's. And it's just a weird job, but they do have talent, and they've had some talented players come through there. When you look at the roster, I mean, Kobe Garland, Adrian Myers, they got guys that have been there. Javon Hanna, I really love. He played with Amani Bates, back in high school, for a few different places. He was at Western Michigan. So they have players. Melvin Bell Jr. is another one that was at La Lumiere. He's out of Chicago, 6'4" guard that I think he's definitely going to open some eyes this year. I'll just put it like that. But it's just one of them tough jobs where it's just hard to get off the ground. I feel bad for Coach Miles because I really love being a Michigan State fan. I love Coach Miles at Nebraska. I really respected what he was doing over there. And it was just, a weird fit, as his tenure kind of wore on. But as a whole, I don't know. I just feel like they'll play spoiler a few different times, but I just don't know. It's a tough program to get off the floor. And then for Air Force, I mean, again, I mentioned it's an academy, right? So you have strict requirements to get in there, and you just can't recruit at the level that you need to. We all know, like, the portal is kind of the king right now, being able to retain talent. And at Air Force, you just can't really do that. And Coach Scott broke it down. He's from that Princeton tree, so he runs that Princeton offense. And they have players. They have some freshmen that are going to have to contribute this year early. They have pieces, but overall, I mean, it's tough. It's tough when you're in the academy, right? You can only do so much. But I mean, they might, win a few games that they probably shouldn't. But overall, I mean, that offense, the way that they play, the style of play, the selfless brand of basketball that they play, the read and react type brand of basketball that they play, it's tough to guard. It's tough to game plan for. But as a whole, I don't know. I just think it's tough to win at these places, man, honestly.
It is challenging. And I'm glad that I actually you brought that up with San Jose State, just literally their proximity. Because I've had a number of friends who are there, some of whom even competed, and they would say that all the time. Anytime they had like a modicum of success, whether it's collectively or individually, like those standout individuals were like poached and ended up transferring. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but it's an interesting challenge.
So, Kevin, before we get to the Big South, are there any insightful, I don't know, quotes, anything that you got from any coaches you spoke with in the Mountain West, that people may not know? Again, these are exclusive interviews that coaches are doing with our writers, not contributors to this magazine. Another reason to go purchase it, it's $12. Link is in the bio. But, I mean, did you gain any insight from any of these coaches or any meaningful conversations you had? I mean, they're all meaningful, but you know what I'm getting at. I mean, is there anything that stuck out to you?
I'd probably say talking to Coach Scott from Air Force, I mean, he broke down the Princeton offense, right? And when you hear that term, we hold it in super high regards, right? Princeton offense is a legendary, term, phrase, whatever you want to coin it, in the world of basketball. And hearing him break it down to me, like, it's really just read and react. It's really just trusting your players, knowing where your guys are going to be. Like, it's a very simple, complex it's a very simple offense, but it works because, again, it's just everybody is in tune with each other. And I thought that jumped off to me just because, again, this is a dude that was at Princeton, that knows the history of Princeton, has been a part of a lot of winning, over there. But overall, I thought that was a great conversation. And talking to Coach Calhoun, right? I mean, I think, talking to him, especially about being in the state of Utah, right? I mean, we're seeing AJ DeBensis at BYU. You're seeing Utah Valley. You're seeing these programs step up, right? You're seeing, Coach Jensen taking the job at Utah. I think seeing the state of Utah kind of just prioritizing basketball. I know it starts with Danny Ainge. I know it starts with that, Utah Jazz organization really invest into the state of Utah is fascinating, right? I mean, we've seen AJ go from Massachusetts or in Cali to Utah to finish off his high school career, right? And that's something we just hadn't really seen before. And so I think, with Coach Calhoun emphasizing that was fascinating. And the last one I'll say is Steve Alford, right? Being a part of that Indiana basketball program, having the history and rich roots that they've had in their history was great to talk about and great to hear because, me, I just being honest, as a Michigan State fan, I talk a lot of crap about Indiana, but actually pulling back the layers, and listening to it, I've always been a huge Isaiah Thomas fan. Shout out to Mike Woodson. I know he was let go this past year, but, he still means a lot to that program. And just hearing some stories about Bob Knight and everything that Hoosier, program stands for and represents, I thought was very dope and cool to hear, especially being a college basketball fan. So I enjoyed it, man. It was a lot of dope coaches. It's a lot of good coaches in this conference. And yeah, man, a shout out to the Mountain West. I know it's kind of like the last year of it being the good old Mountain West as it transitions, but unfortunately, that's just the nature of where the game is at right now, where college football is at right now, where conference realignment is at right now. So yeah, man, I definitely enjoyed it, but it was a lot of great conversations, I'd say.
Have any coaches actually shared any just general feelings or sentiments about how the conference is obviously going to be, moving in a very different direction after this season?
Yeah, Tim Miles was super vocal. And I actually enjoyed it because when I asked him his comparisons, his similarities and differences between the Mountain West and the Big Ten. And he just said the main thing was just resources, of course, right? The Big Ten is, you can make a case, the first or second, most resourceful conferences between the SEC, right? And I just think when he peeled back the layers of the ins and outs, it was fascinating. And Tim Miles is a guy that does not hold anything back. He says it just how he sees it. And when he was comparing it, he was pretty much just saying the resources matter. And I think we all know that. But when you really get into the ins and outs of the requirements, the players you have to go after, the transfer portal, season opening as the NCAA tournament is going on, right? Having to re-recruit your guys that are already on your roster. It's just so much that goes into it. And so talking to him was super dope. And he kind of just was super transparent about everything that was going on with San Jose in particular, but just really the conference as a whole. I think, again, you mentioned, the bottom of the conference kind of, being able to lift you up and determining how good or bad a conference is. But I think when you have programs like San Diego State, like Utah State, it kind of raises the bar for everybody else to just invest in basketball, right? And we've seen some of these programs historically, like Fresno State hasn't been good in a while, but they have a history, right? With Jerry Tarkanian, with Paul George, right? So it's fascinating, but overall, I mean, the Mountain West is still a super dope conference, and unfortunately, it's kind of breaking up and going its separate ways this year, but hopefully it should still stand in a good spot after this year.
What's up?
Okay, should we move on to the Big South?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Kevin, I want to say the Big South High Point has been so good the last 2 years. Now I'm covering the Big East, and that's relevant because Alan Haas went from being the head coach of High Point to going back to Creighton, where he's eventually going to go for Coach McDermott. I actually had the opportunity to talk to Coach McDermott about it for my write-up, and he's just so grateful to have, Coach Haas back on his staff with how high level of coach he is. But High Point, Radford, and I want to say Asheville seem to be the cream of the crop of this conference. I mean, do you agree with that?
I'll probably throw Winthrop in there. I think Coach Prosser has done an excellent job with that program. They've been to the NCAA tournament. So I think that's probably the core four, in my opinion, right there. Exactly what you said.
Do you have anyone in particular that you would say is the preseason favorite? out of those four?
I'm gonna go with High Point just because of all the players that they brought in, right? They have dudes like Scotty Washington out of Cal State Northridge. He was arguably their best player on the Northridge team that had one of their best seasons in that program's history last year. I mean, they bring back some key returners too. And, I think I've been a believer in Cameron Fletcher. A lot of you guys are familiar with that name. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. He started off at Kentucky. He was at Florida State for a couple years with Leonard Hamilton. And he was at Xavier last year with Sean Miller. And he didn't play because he was just trying to get healthy. But I think getting right, it sounds like mentally, physically and emotionally, he's in a great place. And so I still firmly believe in Cameron Fletcher. And then you have a couple other guys. You got a Liberty transfer and Akinu, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He's kind of like a 6'8" forward that honestly is a guard. And Coach Klayman said he's essentially Nikola Jokic. And I know, when we make those comparisons, it can sound extreme a lot, but I trust in Coach Klayman. Shout out to him. He's a SoCal guy too. So I'm glad he got the opportunity. But when I look at Akinu, who again, transfer from Liberty, he kind of is that, right? He's a guy where you could give him the ball at that high post spot. You can run, dribble handoffs with him, right? He can pick and pop, pick and roll. He has great hands, great feet inside the lane. He finishes through traffic. So I think he's kind of going to be the key player for them. He's going to be the engine that determines how far they go. And then the guard play is significant too. I mean, High Point, they just have dudes, honestly, from top to bottom. I think they're quite, I don't want to say easily, but it's pretty plain and simple that they're easily the most deep team in this conference. So I expect them to be honestly right there. I expect them to keep things rolling. It's going to be tough again because when you're the top dog, when you make it to the NCAA tournament last year as a 13 seed, when you win the conference tournament, everybody's trying to knock you off. And so I think with what Coach Klayman has brought in that transfer class especially, High Point is going to be right there again.
If I remember correctly, High Point was a very sexy March Madness sleeper. They played Purdue in the first round, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Conrad remembers, I think 3 of us in the March Madness guide had High Point as the sleeper team.
That's right.
Of course, Purdue's Purdue. Don't bet against Matt Painter. More of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But Conrad,
Yeah.
I was going to say, does that prompt any follow-up for you for the Big South?
I mean, I think their incoming, their transfer class is good. As he said, Cameron Fletcher. Really intrigued to see what Vincent Brady could do for them. But on the flip side, is there any anyone who transferred out of High Point that you think might have their loss, their departure would be fairly significant, or was they just overall upgraded?
I mean, I feel like when you have that amount of success, right, everybody's going to try and poach your roster away just because when you're winning like that, especially, I think that's one thing I got to say about the Big South is the Big South has produced a lot of guys that have gone on to other places and had success. I mean, you look back not too long ago, but Carlik Jones was at Radford and went to Louisville and had an amazing year, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't the best Louisville team. Obviously Louisville's a historic program, but they have a whole bunch of guys that are just that know how to win and know how to, impact games at a high level. And so overall, I mean, I think they'll be fine. I mean, they know exactly what they're doing, right? They know how to keep guys in there, but I don't even know, to be honest with you. I mean, they had a few dudes leave, but I don't think it's any detrimental losses to them, honestly. I mean, I think a lot of these dudes left and they went to better programs, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially because when you go through a coaching change, right, as Steven mentioned, but Coach Huss going to Creighton, I mean, I can't be mad at them for that. I mean, Keza Jiffa was the dude last year, right? He was the guard, the do-it-all guard that just made win and play after win and play for them. We talked about Kamani Hamilton at UNLV. I definitely think he should have an impact over there for the Running Rebels out there in Vegas. I mean, I think those are probably the main two, but outside of that, yeah, I mean, Justin Taylor, we'll see. That's another good one. But, I mean, yeah, they took quite a few losses. But overall, I thought Coach Klayman did a great job of not just, losing talent, but being able to get guys back and especially getting that portal. And what I think probably had one of the better transfer portal seasons in the country, I think.
I think he did. Yeah. I mean, on the outside looking in, I think so too. But I guess, yeah, you mentioned that you think kind of in the mix for top of the conference being High Point. I believe you said Winthrop, UNC Asheville, Radford. I mean, they're in the mix, but is there any of them that could probably either they're a real sleeper like they're gonna really crack their way into maybe not maybe not top 25 discussions, but like they'll be there. They're definitely in the discussion, like the periphery, on like bracketologists and fans' radars.
I think you got to look at UNC Asheville, right? Coach Morrell was coaching under Shaka Smart at Texas. He's been around the block. He knows exactly what it takes to win, and they've been in the tournament, I believe, a few times since he's been there. But I wouldn't necessarily call him a sleeper. I mean, outside of the top 4, if you're talking about, I mean, I want to say Longwood, to be honest with you. And Longwood was in the tournament a few years ago, and they lose Griff Aldridge, who joins Ryan Odom at Virginia as an associate head coach. But Longwood, I mean, they have some pieces that I think could – I mean, that's the thing about the Big South too, right? A lot of these games are close. A lot of these games are competitive on a night in and night out basis. So even when High Point is winning all these games, they're still, less than double-digit wins. And that's the tough thing about it is no matter who it is, it could be the worst team versus the top team in the conference that night. The game 9 times out of 10 is going to be super close. And Longwood, I mean, again, Coach Ronnie Thomas has been there for the past few years. He's been a part of the program. So he's kind of just going to keep things on track there and keep things steady. And when you look at them, I mean, they have pieces that I see, honestly, winning them some tough games. And I don't know if they're going to be a NCAA tournament team. I mean, of course, we know that this conference is usually a one-bid league. You got to kind of win the conference tournament to get in there. But I say Longwood, man. I really firmly believe the Lancers have a couple good pieces that are ready to impact and kind of sneak up on teams. I don't think a lot of people are talking about them, but if they ended up being in that top 4, I would not be surprised whatsoever.
Okay. I don't know how much more. Kevin, I suppose I ask the same question. Is there any, insightful conversations you had with any coaches in the Big South or, anything that maybe surprised you or that you feel like listeners should know about the Big South that any of these coaches talked about?
Yes, I'd say Zach Chu at Radford is originally from Texas. He actually was a part of the Indiana Pacers staff for a few years with Rick Carlisle. And, of course, we've seen the Pacers have that epic run going to the NBA Finals this year. And I kind of just asked him, what did he learn from Rick Carlisle, right? I mean, I think Rick Carlisle is held in high regard in the basketball world. And he talked a lot about just giving his players freedom, right? And not just having a philosophy every year based on you as a coach, but being able to adapt to your roster. And I think that's important because a lot of coaches do not do that in college basketball. I feel like that's one of my biggest pet peeves is coaches are just so cut and dry, like this is what we're going to do. But sometimes you have to adjust to the dude that you bring in. And I know a lot of these coaches recruit based off how players can fit their system, but if that's not always going to be the case. And so when I look at Radford, I think Coach Chu is going to be really good, honestly. And I think, with his NBA pedigree, he's been around, right? He was in the G League. He's been a part of college basketball. He understands the landscape, so he's not walking in anything that he's unfamiliar with. So I think talking to him was super fun just because of his background. And you look at, the Dallas-Fort Worth area from a basketball perspective has produced a ton of coaches, a ton of players, everywhere around that you could possibly think of basketball-wise. So, yeah, I'd say look out for Radford and especially look out for Coach Chu because I think he's going to be a name. As much as I hate to say, I think he's going to be a name where he's probably not going to be around for too long. I just think that's just where the coaching ranks kind of is. So, yeah, definitely remember that name, man. Zach Chu is going to be a guy. He has a very laid-back demeanor. It doesn't seem like he's too loud. Doesn't seem like he's too vocal, but he gets his point across to his players, and his players buy into his system. So I think Zach Chu is going to be a name to definitely look out for in the next few years as a hot coaching candidate.
Nice. I mean, he actually had, I don't know. I mean, I'm with you. I think High Point arguably had like one of the more impressive transfer classes, but I think Radford's transfer class is pretty impressive. I'm really intrigued to see what Jalen Johnson can do.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to give him the rock. Let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, actually, I just threw out one name there. Of all the teams just across the conference, is there any transfer that really stood out to you? Like, okay, this guy is going to be like really impactful, whether or not like that makes his team the best team in the conference, but just like, okay, no, this can maybe change the landscape or kind of tip the scales a little bit.
I mentioned Cameron Fletcher and I mentioned Scotty Washington. So I'm gonna leave the high point guys alone just because I do think that they have some guys that can go, right? Obviously, again, we mentioned they're probably the deepest team in the conference. But I'm gonna go to Charleston Southern. And
Okay.
I think, you have a few interesting pieces, and it's crazy because they really recruited from every level imaginable, whether it was D3, NAIA, D2, they went everywhere. And so I think the name to watch for them is Trent Coleman from Auburn Montgomery, which is a D2 school down there, in the Plains. And he's just a physical forward, right? And I think that's kind of the basis of this conference, to be honest with you guys. It's a whole bunch of forwards that are active rebounders, that finish through and embrace contact, that are active on both ends of the floor, that set the tone for their team, that don't take plays off, that hustle. And so when I look at that Charleston Southern team, I definitely think Trent Coleman is a name to look out for just because he brings a lot of physical traits. And when Coach Nimley was talking about him, he raved about him. And he showed him nothing but love and respect. And so I think that's one to watch out for. And again, I'm going to leave the high point guys alone just because I think that's kind of unfair. But I'll probably say that's the main one. But it's a few, to be honest. I mean, like when you look at from top to bottom, I mean, you got guys that have been from everywhere, right? I mean, so it's tough, but yeah, I say that's probably the main one. I think Trent Coleman is one to definitely look out for. But yeah, Scotty Washington, I got to give him a shout out too, just because he's from out here. He was at Cal State Northridge, and he just plays a winning brand of basketball, right? I thought he could average more points last year, if I'm just being real, but he was contributing at a high level to that, Matador squad that won a lot of games in the Big West last year. And so overall, yeah, I mean, you can literally just pinpoint that entire high point roster. But if you go down the list, I mean, yeah, you look at, UNC Asheville got a couple guys in there. Winthrop got a couple guys in there. But me personally, I'm definitely looking out for Trent Coleman and seeing what he could do for Coach Nimley's squad and the Charleston Southern team, man.
I want to see what Trent Coleman and Jaquias Franklin can do together. I think
too.
those. That's why actually I'm not saying I'm surprised that you said Trent Coleman, but those were the two that I think I really identified on that roster. I'm like, like you could kind of imagine some cool like 2-man game possibilities there.
For what it's worth, I'm doing the Conference USA for this magazine, and I talked to Richie McKay, and he was raving about Owen Aquino. I know he said we're not really touching on the high point guys, but given like how important Justin Bodo was to High Point last year, he's now at Baylor, I believe. I think Owen Aquino is going to have a major impact. He might be Defensive Player of the Year in this conference, for what it's worth. So
yeah, I think he's going to end up being the key to that team. He's going to end up being the entire offensive, center hub for them. No pun intended. Because he just, when you talk about, I think it's important. We talked earlier about your front court having guys that are kind of versatile. I know that's kind of the phrase everybody loves to use nowadays is versatility. But when you have a big that has guard skills and knows how to pass the ball, I think that is a powerful weapon to have because it's a lot of guys that catch the ball in the post and they only have a certain array of moves and they don't know how to accept a double team. They don't know how to pass to the opposite side, the opposite corner, opposite wing, whatever the case may be. And when you have a guy like that can break down defenses, that can grab the ball and start the transition and start the fast break, that's key. And that can help a lot, right? And so when you can be able to push the ball and you can let your guards run first and you have your big bringing up the ball and you can have your big break down the opposing team's big man, that can create a lot of mismatch issues. So I think Coach Klayman is going to have a lot of fun, with that team. And I'll say, sticking with the high point guys, Conrad Martinez from Arizona, he didn't really crack the rotation. He only played a few minutes. But again, Tommy Lloyd, we all know Arizona is a premier college basketball program. Conrad Martinez is another guy that I think is going to step into the fold and be able to impact, just because when you look at these dudes that come from overseas or across the waters, we all know it's a different brand of basketball. And I actually asked Coach Klayman about how he would compare the overseas game to college basketball. And he said it's honestly very similar, right? Because it's really predicated off passing, because in the college basketball game is no defensive three in the key. So you have to get really creative with how you attack defenses, because it's kind of like a cheat code, if I'm just being honest. And that's why I love it, because you got to find different ways to be able to score at a high level. Because when you have a guy that can just sit in the paint, I mean, that's really easy. So I think Conrad Martinez is definitely a name to watch out for.
One final question, actually, just as you were talking about earlier, the way you phrased it, it seems to be like I don't want to say like they emphasized it, but maybe just the way these rosters came together. A lot of it's very forward heavy, right? Like a lot of like forwards will be heavily involved directly in the action. Do you then think? Because I'm actually, after I said that, I kind of look across all the rosters, and you're right. I think it's more of like their front courts are in that 6'7" to 6'10" or 6'9", 6'10" range. Like, do you then envision this? And I don't want to spoil your write-ups, but maybe a little bit more of an up-tempo identity to the entire conference compared to previous years?
100%, 100%. I think the front court play is honestly what fascinates me the most about this conference because, Presbyterian brings back a dude that, set their shot block record in a single season last year. Toya Solomon, returns to UNC Asheville, who is a very active forward. So it's to me, the front court is going to win a lot of games, but I think the guard play is going to determine who's actually the best team in the league. And I think from a night-to-night basis, that front court is just going to be impactful, super impactful. And when you can dominate the glass, when you can get second chance opportunities, when you can make opposing teams, rethink about how they attack the paint, how they get into the lane, and you force teams to be really creative, that's impactful, right? And we talked about, going back to Utah State kind of being smaller, their approach is a little bit different. But overall, I think too, when you have bigs that are this size, usually for the most part, a lot of these bigs, I think this is my favorite part about them, is that they can guard on the perimeter, right?
Yeah.
They can get down the stance. They can guard guards. They can guard wings. They have the strength to guard wings. They have the lateral speed to guard guards. And I think that's important, just to be able to, you're not going to be able to just, ice pick and rolls and just, switch pick and rolls. It's going to be a lot that goes into that. So when you look at the versatility of the front court in the Big South, it's a lot of teams that have fascinating pieces that are going to determine a lot of games. But again, I think for me personally, I think when you always look at it, that guard play always ends up being the ultimate separator. And so I think that's probably how it's going to pan out. But overall, the Big South has a lot to like, between the forward and center positions.
That's right.
Okay. Conrad, any other follow-up?
No, man. I think this is good. I think this is giving readers, potential readers, just enough, right, that you want to learn more about all these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin is one of the best in the industry. That's why, we had to bring him on to contribute to this project. So again, if you're watching on YouTube, link is in the bio. $12 to pre-order the magazine. It'll be out October 13th. If you're watching this on Twitter, you're already on the Center Hub's Twitter page. Go see our pinned tweet. It's there. $12 once again. Other than that, go follow us at @thecenterhub_BB. You could follow me on Twitter at @the_NBAgle. You could follow Conrad on Twitter at CP3_777. And you could follow Kevin on Twitter at Kev Luke the Great. THA is there. Otherwise, myself, Conrad, Kevin, we will talk to you guys Thursday. We are going live every Tuesday and every Thursday leading up to the season, talking with these writers of the magazine about the teams. So myself, Conrad, Kevin, I will talk to you guys Thursday. Thanks for listening.